cations attract negatively charged ions that are called anions. On their own, they are just chemical ions, but when they come together, they form salts, such as table salt, sodium chloride. Soil salinity causes artificial drought-like conditions. So I use the word artificial drought because in a true drought, your soils would be bone dry. But under soil salinity, due to salinity, if salinity would not be there, there would be enough soil moisture for seed to absorb the water to germinate, for seedlings or plant roots to absorb the water to grow normally. But because of salts, salts try to keep the water molecules in the soils and they don't let seed to absorb the water to germinate and plant roots to absorb the water to grow normally. And that's why in the saline areas, first of all, you're going to have poor germination and delayed. Whatever germination would be there, you're not going to have good stands either. Oftentimes, you will see visible salt crust right at the surface. So visual symptoms of salinity are very easy to find, but rarely you're going to find some sites where there would be no salt crust, but still there would be salinity issue. I've seen those. I've actually taken the soil samples and I've tested those and salinity issue was there. Sodicity, on the other hand, is not caused by sodium that is present as a salt. This is a very important point to understand to differentiate between salinity versus sodicity, because as a salt, sodium will cause salinity impacts. And as a salt, that sodium will be attracted to the negative charge of, say, ions like chloride, sulfate, carbonate, and bicarbonate. The sodium that causes sodicity is attracted to the negative charge of soil particles like clay and humus. And when sodium forms that relationship, it starts breaking those clay and humus particles away from soil aggregates or chunks. So the size of the soil aggregates will keep getting smaller and smaller. Your soils will settle in dense layers. Pore space will get plugged or pore size will shrink, and essentially we'll lose macropores that are crucial for draining excess non-plant available soil water that's also called gravitational soil water. Unlike soil salinity, there are no clear visual symptoms of sodicity right at the surface. And Victor, correct me if I'm wrong. The question was, in real world, how can we determine if there is a soil sodicity issue or no? I could give you one hint that if you have soil sodicity, those spots will not infiltrate water good. That means they will stay saturated for a long time. So the surrounding areas will get rid of the excess water, they'll dry out, but those spots with high levels of sodium, they'll stay saturated for a long time, and when they dry, they get quite hard. This is one practical way to assess soil salinity, but the best way to assess soil sodicity and salinity, and for the third issue I'm going to talk about, is soil sampling. You could see me in the picture as helping a couple different farmers with sampling this unproductive spot with the help of the county extension agent. And because I've seen the soil results, I could tell you that it was not just salinity. There were other issues like sodicity too. The process because of which soil sodicity breaks down soil aggregates is called dispersion. The opposite of that would be flocculation. So in flocculation, our soil particles flocculate towards each other to form aggregation. Once you have good soil aggregates, that will lead to good structure and pore space, especially the macropores. There are two types of soil aggregation happens in the soils. Chemical aggregation, that's mostly promoted by ions like calcium. And the second one is biological aggregation of soil particles. That is promoted by microbes. So when we add organic materials such as livestock, manure, cover crop, biomass, microbes break that down, and during that process, there are some byproducts, such as glumelin. And that product was named glumelin because it literally glues soil particles together. So that would be considered as biological aggregation of soil particles. I'm also going to show you some data, how much soil sodicity in the real life can affect soil water infiltration. So we have our no-till versus conventional till demonstration. And you may be surprised in the western part, no-till is very common, but around Northeast, we till our soils to death. So we started this demonstration. This is the 5th year. What I do in every fall, I go and pound a 6-inch diameter ring, and then I simulate first 1 inch of rain by pouring down, I think it's 444 milliliters of deionized water. I time it. When that water is absorbed by the soil is still saturated, I simulate the 2nd inch and I time that too. So in fall of 2021, I started doing that. So I have on the no-till side, non-sodic area, which I'm calling no-till PG or productive ground. And then I have a spot that has very high level of sodicity. So I call it no-till unproductive ground or UG. So fall 2021 on the non-sodic area, 1st inch of rain took 2 minutes, 5.74 seconds. 2nd inch took 8 minutes, 21.19 seconds. When I went to the sodic area, the 1st inch took 23 minutes, 1.88 seconds. The 2nd inch took 1 hour, 16 minutes, and close to 21 seconds. You see the difference in the way water is infiltrating through the soil, and that's because of soil sodicity, because it's the same soil type, same soil series. It's just a difference in the sodicity. Now, in the fall of 2022, similar results were found, but after that, actually, soil water infiltration started getting much worse on the sodic site, especially, despite the fact that both of these spots are under no-till. This would be the 5th year. And here's how these two spots looked in 2023. On your left is, if you're facing the screen, on the left is the no-till productive ground. On the right side, you could see actually in the background that the productive ground merges into the unproductive ground, which is unproductive ground spot is very small, but very high levels of salinity and sodicity. That's how it looked. And here is the soil results for the past 5 years. So EC is the test for soil salinity or electrical conductivity, and then SAR or sodium absorption ratio is the test for soil sodicity. According to NDSU research, if SAR is 5 or less, you're not going to have significant dispersion. I like to see that number at 3 or less. So look at the productive ground EC, which is 4.18 saturated paste, which is a little bit high for sensitive crops, but SAR, you could see that in most years it's been 5 or less, except in 2023 and 2025, and it was a little bit over 6, but it's still not too bad. Now look at the unproductive ground. EC is very high, but look at how high SARs are. In the first 3 years, it was 23 or more, and the last 2 years it's been 16 and 18, so very high. So this is how much soil sodicity can affect the way soil water moves through the soil profile or layers or horizon. Same concept applies to the success of tile drainage. Now, the basic objective of us tiling our field is we want to get rid of that excess non-plant available gravitational soil water as soon as possible so that our topsoil is not saturated, it will warm up quickly. But the success of that tile drainage means that how those soil layers that are sitting on top of the tiles, letting that excess water infiltrate through those layers. So this is a picture of our tile drainage project here at the Langdon REC, which we tiled in 2014. Tiling depth is 4 feet below the surface. And what we have found that after decent rainfall or heavy rainfall, when I say heavy rainfall, 1.5 inches or more, we still don't get to get that sump pump run. That means our tile drainage system is not draining the water because it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days for that excess water to move through the soil profile to get into the tiles, and then these tiles take that water to the submain and then main takes it to the sump pump. So we have non-sodic, low sodic plots and high sodicity level plots. What I have seen that after every heavy rainfall on the plots with low sodicity level, there's no standing water. on the surface. You could walk over them, nothing will stick to your boots. But on the plots where we have high sodicity levels, there would be standing water, but the pump wouldn't run for 3 to 5 days. I also have observation wells in each plot, 7.25 feet deep. But when I would go and check the water table depth, say a day or two after a heavy rainfall, it'll show me that the water table is very low. It's not shallow at all because that water that's sitting on soil surface has not moved through the soil profile to raise the water table. So tile drainage performance also can be negatively affected by high levels of sodicity. Are these problems new? Not really. So this is a picture of a cover page of an NDSU extension bulletin that was reprinted in 1967. I was lucky enough because I had a county extension agent in Cavalier County who was there for 40 years. He retired about 10 years ago. So he came one day and walked in my office and said, "Have you seen this?" I said, "No." I read it and I said, "Can I scan it?" He said, "I had an extra copy, so I'm just going to give this to you." I scanned it to save it for future because I could lose a hard copy, but hopefully I'm not going to lose an electronic copy. This publication mentioned that back in 1960s, it was estimated that 1 million acres were affected by soil salinity and 2 million acres were affected by soil sodicity. So these are not new problems we are facing. This was estimated or mentioned in 1960s. According to a recent reference in 2010, it was estimated that about 5.8 million acres were affected by soil salinity alone, which will be about 15% of our total farm and ranch land in our state. So we are talking about quite a bit of chunk. And then another estimate, what they did is they went through soil series and they picked out soil series that are known to have nitric horizon. Nitric horizon is the issue, excess sodium, which leads to soil sodicity. And then they calculated the number of acres under those soil series. And number came to 4.7 million acres, which will be about 12% of our farm and ranch land. I personally think these numbers are very conservative. Why I say this? The soil series that are not known to have salinity or sodicity issues can develop these issues within 5 or 6 years if there are significant changes in the weather. There's a lot of salts and sodium causing sodicity in the deeper depths of our soil in the soil parent material. So anytime, say, the recent wet cycle that started in 1993 led to shallow groundwater depth, everything will come close to the topsoil. And then most of the time it stays there and it will make spots that are otherwise very productive, they didn't have any salinity or sodicity issue, but then they will also have these issues. So these numbers are very conservative, I would say. The third issue I'm going to talk about is a little bit controversial because not a lot of people agree with me that this is an issue. I personally think this is an issue, and I'm going to provide you with some references too. So the shrinking and expanding type of clays, such as smectites, in those, the clay sheets are not very tightly held. So there is a little bit of a space in between, which is also called interlayer space, especially around the edges, unlike, say, the non-shrinking and expanding type of clay, such as illite and colonite. So ions like magnesium, when they are dry, they are very small in size, so they squeeze in between the interlayer space. But when they get hydrated with water, their size gets bigger. So they can drive the clay sheets further apart. So this process of swelling is different compared to the dispersion process we saw, which was happening due to sodicity, but the net impact on soil pore space is same. Pore space will shrink and we will lose macropores, and macropores are crucial for having good soil water infiltration or drainage. Here are two references, one from 1935, one from 1936. And what these scientists were discussing in these papers, that they talked about soils that were acting like sodic soils, but they didn't have any sodicity issue. What they had was excess levels of exchangeable magnesium versus exchangeable calcium. And based on my experience of producer and productive sites in 14 counties throughout our state, what I have seen that salinity is almost always 99.99% combined with either sodicity or high levels of magnesium versus calcium or both. So when you see sites like this in this picture where there is a visible salt crust at the surface and salts were literally blowing, somebody actually commented, was I ice fishing? I wasn't ice fishing. I was actually soil sampling this site with handheld auger 4 feet deep. So when you see sites like this, what is the first thought that comes to your mind? There would be huge issue, high levels of salinity. Well, because I have the soil results, I can show you that EC saturated paste again is 5.85, which is high for sensitive crops like soybeans, but you might be able to grow salt tolerant annual crops like oats, barley, sunflowers, sugar beets in a year where you get frequent rains. But look how high SAR or sodicity is, 24.54. So looks can be deceiving. Sodicity is a much bigger issue here compared to, say, salinity. So if you want to assess all three of the issues, salinity, sodicity, high levels of magnesium versus calcium, soil sampling is the best way to assess these issues. And here's the way to do things. First, you have to create zones based on severity of the issue. That means some spots will not support any growth, though those would be bare, not even noxious weeds will grow. Some might support marginal crops or stands. You don't want to mix soil from both spots because otherwise you're going to get an average. So cropping history and landscape, and then sample 3 to 4 feet deep in 12-inch increments. When we sample our soils for soil fertility, we generally go 0 to 6 inch, 6 to 24, which is fine because fertility goes down with soil depth. But these issues come from bottom up. So I like to go 3 to 4 feet deep. Having said that, the most important soil depth is still would be the top 6 or 12 inches. But I like to know what is going on in the third or the fourth foot. Then each depth should be analyzed separately for EC or electrical conductivity for salinity, sodicity. For sodicity, we'll get it checked for SAR and then pH, and then we'll also get separate calcium versus magnesium and sodium numbers to see how high magnesium levels are versus calcium. And then if you want to use a soil amendment later, the negatively charged ion concentration or levels will help you determine which amendment is more suitable. By using saturated paste extract method, please note that the method is highlighted. So method is as important as test. And then if you want to calculate the rates of soil amendment, you would also need another test, CEC or cation exchange capacity, and generally top depth is fine through sodium saturation and ammonium extraction method. Again, method is highlighted. Label each sample clearly and clearly communicate to the soil testing lab which test you want through what method. And here's the example I'm going to use to emphasize why methods are as important as the test. So we have two different soil tests here belonging to two different fields, few miles apart, east of Mountain, North Dakota. And I sampled these sites in 2017. So let's first look at this saline and sodic site. So there are two methods to analyze soil EC. General method is 1-to-1 soil to water ratio. That is 4. And saturated paste EC is 6.09. Now, with CEC2, we have two different methods, summation or addition. That gives you artificially higher number, especially if you have salinity issue. So 53.7 milliequivalent per 100 gram. But the true CEC, which is analyzed through sodium saturation and ammonium extraction method, is 30.6. See the differences in number? Now, this site has salinity issue and SAR is 10.63. So typical case of salinity combined with sodicity. Let's go to the other one. 1-to-1 EC 2.89 and then saturated paste EC 6.84. Sometimes we try to simplify by saying that if you want to convert 1-to-1 EC into saturated paste, we could just multiply it by 2, but it's not that simple because here on the first example, if I say convert 1-to-1 EC from 4, if I multiply it by 2, it should be 8. but the saturated paste EC is 6.09. On the second example, 2.89 multiplied by 2 would be a little bit less than 6, but saturated paste EC is 6.84. And that's that the difference is because even if you use the conversion table based on soil texture, your saturated paste EC could be 2 to 3 times higher compared to your 1-to-1 EC. And then let's look at your CEC through regular method 39.9 and your sodium saturation method CEC 16.1. Why it's important to get the true CEC analyzed through sodium saturation and ammonium extraction method. Why? Because say if you want to utilize the soil amendments such as gypsum, everything starts with 100% gypsum and then you could convert it into other amendments as well. So we use CEC in the USDA or any other formula. If this number 39.9 is say 2.5 times higher than 16.1, the formula will give me tons of 100% pure gypsum per acre foot, 2.5 times higher. So it's much cheaper to pay for the correct method because this method is sodium saturation, ammonium extraction method is more expensive. NDSU testing lab is not there. They used to charge for the summation or addition method $15. For the sodium saturation method, $25. Eggwise, I think, charges for the sodium saturation method $54 or $55. So it's expensive, but you'll save more money if you wanted to utilize soil amendments. Okay, so this site again has salinity issues. Let's look at sodicity. SAR is 2.89. So no sodicity issue at all. But the farmer insisted that the both sites acted the same. That means they were holding the water for a long time. That's when I started digging deep and I realized that calcium is 24.27 milliequivalent per liter, whereas magnesium is 74.14, 3 times higher. I've actually seen worse results, but this was the first time I became aware of this issue. And I emailed these results to some other people in Fargo, and that's when those people emailed me those papers from 1935 and 1936. So I started paying attention to this issue after 2017. And I'm going to quickly share with you some of the data. So this data belongs to the producer fields that were unproductive. So with close coordination of our extension agents, what we do here in Langdon, I go out and I help farmers with sampling unproductive areas. We do this for free, and then they pay for the lab charges. And once we get the results back, we sit down with them and discuss the results and explain the results to them, provide them with different options for remediation. So since 2012 until the end of 2024, we have helped 194 producers sampling 509 unproductive sites in 14 counties throughout the state. So here are some average results. So these averages are for 458 soil samples from 16 to 2024. So what happened to the soil results from 12 to 15? I wasn't very organized when I started this job. So I take responsibility for that. But if you look at the average results of first 12 inches, the average EC of 458 soil samples, saturated paste is 9.75. Average SAR is 13.61. And look at the ratio of calcium versus magnesium and sodium. Sodium is the highest levels, followed by magnesium and then calcium. This should be the other way around. Calcium should be the highest cation in our soil chemistry, followed by magnesium and then lastly, sodium. And if you want to see soil results, examples of soil results, which do not show any of these three issues, here's an example. So look at your saturated paste EC again, 0.37, 0.61, 0.44, 0.61. No problem at all. Look at your calcium versus magnesium and sodium ratio. So I'm not talking about this ratio from soil fertility point of view. I'm talking about this ratio from soil structural point of view. Calcium is at least 2.5 times higher than magnesium and 14, 15 times higher than sodium. If you have results like that, you're not going to have these issues. So once you establish, say, sodicity issue, you will have to add free calcium to the soil by applying soil amendments such as gypsum, lime or beet lime, calcium chloride salt, elemental sulfur. Different amendments are suitable for different type of weathers. For example, elemental sulfur, I've seen it doesn't work here because I've seen granules fully intact 11 or 12 years after application. So if the granules are not dissolving, they're not going to provide the chemical reaction we are looking for, followed by salinity remediation practices. Here's the chemical reaction we are looking for. Look at the bottom of the slide. Sodium is attracted to the negative charge of soil particles, which are mentioned here as colloids, plus calcium sulfate. There should be here 2H2O. That means calcium sulfate with 2 molecules of water is agriculture grade gypsum. This just calcium sulfate is plaster of Paris. So when we add gypsum to the soil, first that calcium, it came as calcium sulfate, calcium separate from sulfate, then it goes and displaces sodium from the soil particle negative charge, and then it neutralizes the negative charge of soil particle. It starts flocculating soil particles together. And then sodium, now its positive charge is free, so it attracts a negatively charged ion. Now it's leachable. So here's another example of showing you the example of flocculation. So sodium doesn't promote any flocculation. It has only one positive charge. It'll just be sodium plus clay or sodium plus humus. But when you add calcium, it has 2 positive charges. It acts like a bridge. So it starts flocculating soil particles together, and flocculation will lead to good aggregation. When you have good soil aggregates, you will have good structure and pore space, especially the macropores. Macropores, I cannot emphasize more. Macropores are the key to draining the excess soil water or having good soil water infiltration, or for that matter, leaching salts too. Same concept will apply if you have high levels of magnesium versus calcium. You will have to raise the soil calcium levels. So you'll have to apply amendments, which will add free calcium, followed by salinity remediation practices. So what do I mean by salinity remediation practices? We don't control rain, but what we could do is to plant something which will grow there to reduce evaporation. When we reduce evaporation, the second type of soil water, which is called capillary water, it moves against the forces of gravity in any direction, from wet to dry areas. It's not intercepted by tiles. It still brings more salts and sodium with it. So if you have more moisture in the topsoil, you will minimize the wicking up or capillary movement of groundwater towards the surface. So these pictures are from our annual cropping trial at a salinity and sodicity gradient. So these varieties of barley and oats were growing at low to moderate levels of salinity and sodicity in the top 6 inches. So germination was good and the stands were good. Now we went from low to moderate to moderately high levels of salinity and sodicity in the top 6 inches. Look what happened to germination and growth. Same days, I took the pictures on the same day. And we went to these kind of spots where the levels were very high in the top 6 inches of salinity and sodicity. Nothing even germinated. So when you're dealing with these kind of spots, such as our groundwater management site, which looked like this in April 2015, even though we tiled it in July 2014. So I knew no annual crop will work here. So I went back and planted a perennial salt-tolerant grass mix in September of 2015, and 13 months later, this is how the same site looked. So there are ways we could still establish some vegetative growth on spots that are very tough, very high levels of salinity and sodicity. But sometimes I've seen some farmers planting soybean or sensitive crops on spots which do not support the growth at all. And after planting, they end up with nothing, and then they go back and till it and keep making the spots worse. So some crops might make more sense on the paper, but on the ground, it may not. So we have options. That's all I'm trying to say. So here's how we try to help assess these issues to the producers close to it. With the help of our county extension agents, we go and help our farmers with sampling these spots. And we want them to be there because they know their land, the history, and everything else. And then I give them the list of the tests and the methods, and they can send it to any lab they want. I just want the lab to analyze the samples for the test I list and then the methods. I generally do not even want the fertility analysis for these spots because fertility levels are high. And then they are responsible for shipping of the samples and paying the lab for their charges. Once we get the results back, we sit down with them, explain the results to them, and then try to give them options that are practical to remediate these issues.
Excellent presentation, sir. I think that sodicity issue is so understated in North Dakota as far as the knowledge of it. And in my pretty long career, it's often ignored and it's poorly understood. And the more you can educate about that, the better. I did have a question reading an article in Ag Week magazine about University of Minnesota extension lady up in Crookston that's doing some
Lindsay
demo work
Pease.
on a couple of products that farmers are using up in that part of the world. And so often these soil amendments are lumped into the category of snake oil, sometimes deservedly so. But the one's called calcine and
Mhm,
the other one's called salt be gone. Have
mhm.
you heard of these? Do you have any comments on either one?
Okay, so number one, I think the lady you're referring to, her name is Lindsay Pease, and I'm not sure where she tiled her when she joined University of Minnesota at the Crookston station. She tiled that area, but I don't know whether they have the salinity or sodicity issues that site or no, or whether they tested it or no. Now, when it comes to soil amendments, I've had farmers who would ask me, can I apply 5 tons of gypsum or that? And I try to tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you about that number until I see the soil results. So we need to establish first the need for the soil amendments. And that need is you don't need any amendments for soil salinity for that matter. Only sodicity or for that high levels of exchangeable magnesium versus calcium. And I cannot agree with you more that soil sodicity is very underestimated. It's much more widespread. I've not sampled soils close to Dickinson, but I've come to Napoleon, for example. So which counties would be that? Emmons County, McIntosh County, and Logan counties. And same issues I found in Northeast. No difference. Salinity always combined with sodicity or high levels of magnesium versus calcium. So you could say that I was still on the east side of Missouri River. So I cannot really say what is happening in your neck of the wood, but calcine, now come to calcine. Okay, I know the owners, Jim and Darcy um, Ericksons. They are the owners. They've met me several times. Here's what I'm going to say. I do not personally know anything about their product, so I'm not going to put it down, but I'm not going to endorse it either. What they have told me, so say if you establish soil sodicity and you apply gypsum, that gypsum comes as calcium sulfate. That calcium, you apply gypsum for calcium, not for sulfate. So that calcium needs to separate from sulfate, and rainwater help us do that. What they claim that their product, calcine, will separate calcium from sulfate if you apply, say, gypsum. So essentially, it will help dissolve the soil amendment which you applied. They did never mention it to me that their product replaces the soil amendment, such as gypsum or lime or beet lime or calcium chloride salt. These amendments, like gypsum, calcium chloride salt, or lime, are have been used all around the world for a long, long time, and they're established. So that's what they told me. Now, what I hear from farmers is something different. Farmers say that they are promoting their product, the owners, as you don't need to apply gypsum, for example, or any other amendment, just apply calcine. So to me, they're going back against what they told me. They told me that this is kind of a, like when you spray herbicide, you add a product to say increase the solubility of your herbicide. But when you say that that product is now replacing the chemical as a herbicide, to me, that doesn't make any sense. So these are my comments about calcine. Salt be gone. I've heard about it, but I don't know much about that product. So what I would say that these are I would consider them supplemental products, but products like gypsum, lime, beet lime, calcium chloride salts, they have a long history, proven history to be used as soil amendments, but you have to still establish the need for the soil amendments. You don't just start. So in the sugar beet country, sometimes farmers are applying 10 tons of beet lime per acre. And they're not using it as soil amendment. I think they're using it to prevent some disease or something. So you got to have some reason. From the soil perspective, you can apply these soil amendments to remediate soil sodicity or high levels of magnesium versus calcium. But how do you prove it unless you take the soil sample and you have the results in front of you? So I apologize for the long answer, but I hope I answered your question.
You did. Great job. Great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.
What I've heard about the salt become product is that it's a biological, and then those microorganisms will eat away the salt. And then the question remains, that salt has to go somewhere. It's not
Well,
going to be
if the microbes are eating the salts and dying there, their biomass would still have the salts.
exactly, yeah. So you're not really
If you go by
looking.
that myth.
Yeah.
It's
So
the same concept. So like I saw that in Pakistan too, we had huge issues of salinity and sodicity there too. There were some grasses which they were claiming that say they would absorb the salts, but then they were letting those grasses die in the land and they were not removing them from the field. So you're essentially not removing the salts. So same concept here. Even if their theory is correct, where would that biomass, microbial biomass, go? Their bodies will contain the salts still. So you have to essentially leach the salts down or wash them away or through tile drainage or do something about it. And one more thing I wanted to add, I have seen in the soil depths where soil sodicity levels are high, oftentimes salinity levels are also high because sodicity affects the way water moves through the soil layers. And that's the water that helps us leach the salts into the deeper depths too. So if your soil water infiltration is slow, then you're not going to leach the salts either.
the question was, in a real field situation, how do we figure out whether poor crop growth is mainly caused by salt stress, too much sodium, or poor drainage? You kind of touched on that a little bit during the talk, but if you want to develop more of that.
Well, poor drainage, like some of the drowned out areas, for example, I saw that here too a couple of weeks ago. We got 2.27 inches in 3 days, and there were some drowned out areas. So that you will know that whether you lost a stand or crop growth is affected by excess water. And if you have salinity issue, most often you will have some sort of salt crust at the surface. Once the soil dries, if you do not see any salt crust or anything like that, then it's mostly the water issue. And soil sodicity, like I said while I was explaining soil sodicity, to me, the most visual symptom is that those spots, unless they shouldn't be very low, but those spots hold water for a long time compared to the surroundings. Water will stand there and those spots would be saturated for a long time.
Yeah, thank you, Naeem.
Hmm.
So I guess you were talking about those salt tolerant species.
Yeah.
And some of them take salt and some of them don't, right?
Some of them what?
Some of them will uptake those salts and remove them from the soil, and some of them just they don't. They're just tolerant. So could you please elaborate on how those two different options work?
In my personal thinking, most of these grasses we plant are just salt tolerant. And when we say salt tolerant, that means these species would also be drought tolerant because that's the impact of the excess salts. Salts try to prevent these plants from absorbing the water. So the drought tolerant plants or crops would be more salt tolerant. And I like to plant a mix of 5 grasses. These 4 of them are white wheat grasses. One is Russian wild rye. I could I could see that some people are writing, and by the way, there would be a NDSU publication which would be coming out very soon. But I could tell you right now, it's tall wheatgrass, slender wheatgrass, western wheatgrass, green wheatgrass. The varieties AC saltlander, and then Russian wild rye. And if you want to plant these all 5, seeding rate would be about 1.5 pounds of each grass in the mix. So 7.5 pounds for all 5 in the mix. But sometimes some grass seed might not have good germination, so you end up with 4. Then you bump up the seeding rate to 2 pounds per acre, so you'll end up with 8 pounds per acre of 4 grasses. I would not suggest planting less than 3 types of grasses in the mix. Why? They each do different things during the growing season. Some establish early in the growing season, some late. So you always have something going on in a mix.
So another question, maybe a stupid one, but planting these salt tolerant grasses in the ratio like you just recommended,
Mhm,
how effective would that be to plant them, hay them over a number of years, haul the hay away, feed the
mhm,
hay?
mhm.
Can you appreciably reduce salt levels in the soil by hauling the hay away? How much is actually taken up by the grasses?
So I'll provide you with some examples. First of all, say if you're dealing with a saline or sodic site, if you want to bring in annual cash crop one day, you'll be better off applying the soil amendments and then putting that area into perennial salt tolerant grasses for some time. But if you just want to leave that spot or field into perennial salt tolerant grasses, you don't need to apply soil amendments. So there is a producer 8 miles west of Langdon. In 2012, he planted a so-called salt-tolerant alfalfa variety. I, I, I use this word so-called because to me, alfalfa is not a very salt-tolerant plant on its own. People market it different ways, but I've yet to see a salt-tolerant alfalfa variety which will do much better on real saline areas. When I say real, like the salt levels would say you could grow your sunflowers, for example. If your soil saturated paste EC is over 4, you're not probably going to get any good growth from alfalfa. I don't care what they call it. I would like to see it before I believe it. So here's what that farmer did. He planted these grasses, I mentioned it to you, with a little bit of alfalfa seed because he had leftover alfalfa seed remained dormant for 3 years. And then after 3 years, it started popping out here and there. These grasses are okay to good hay. They are palatable, but they're okay to good hay if you cut them at the right time. They're not super high quality hay, but in a dry year, especially when there's shortage of hay, I've seen some years, this would be good hay. Now, so that farmer had that perennial grass mix there for 7 years, from 2012 until the fall of 2019. Then he took the grasses out and he put a wheat crop, a spring wheat, in 2020. Fabulous stand. For 3 years, he had very good annual crops. After 3 years, those spots are coming back and they're getting bigger in size every year because he didn't apply the amendments he needed to apply. So there were 2 options for him. Either he should have applied the amendments and then put the grasses there for 7 years, or you have the rotation have the perennial salt tolerant grasses for 7, 8 years, come back with 2, 3 years of annual cash crop, and then go back to the grasses. Because these grasses can deceive you. They'll grow well on spots where your annual crops will not grow well. So you're going to think, oh, my land is fully reclaimed, and you'll go back to annual cash crops. For a couple of years, 2, 3 years, you will have very good crops. But then your land will start going back to where it was 7, 8 years ago. So that's a decision you could make. But I would say that these grasses are okay to good hay. And if you added a pound or two of a winter hardy alfalfa, and if it establishes 3, 4 years later, that will really increase the quality of your hay. Out of the 5 grasses I mentioned, tall wheat grass is not really liked by livestock, but other 4 are a little bit better. But they are all are palatable, but not, like I said, not like top-notch quality hay. They'll mainly help you heal the land, and then you could probably utilize hay when you have shortage, or mix it with some other good quality hay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, man, but I think it's important to make the distinction between plant species that will take up the salt and store it in the plant, like Paspalum and other salt bushes, versus these other species you're talking about. I think they just increase the microflores and water moving in the soil.
Some
So they don't like.
species, yeah, some species survive by picking up more salts, so they take up ions, so they also try to create more pull for the water molecules. So they absorb more salts or nutrients or ions in their root cell membrane, and they create that extra pull for the water molecule. That's how they survive salinity. And um, some of these are just their water requirements are lower compared to other species, so they are more drought tolerant. Some are deeper rooted, so their roots go into the deeper depths where the salt levels are lower, and they extract the moisture from there. So there are different ways different plants survive.
Yes, have time for one more. There's one more question from the group.
This publication, by the way, Victor, is going through ECOM right now. So we just got the first version. This would be finalized soon, and then it would be available as a numbered extension publication. My suggestion would be to utilize that as much as you can. We started writing it for the Governor's Legacy Program. I don't know, are you guys aware of that?
Yes.
Okay, so this same concept, basically the program wants you to take your unproductive acres out of annual crops and put them into these perennial grasses. That's what they are trying to do. They have other objectives too, like wildlife and other things. So that prompted our team to provide some information from different perspectives. So finally, we are able to write a publication where there's a lot of other views too, not just mine. I truly believe in perennials. In my view, they actually heal the land.
Yeah, we have a very successful case story here in Dickinson. Unfortunately, that farmer wasn't able to join us today, but yeah, he's been doing tall grass with Gentiles and other combinations. It seems to work very well for him.